All right, good morning, everybody. Welcome to our meeting number 14. I realize our numbers might be down a bit today because of the Pepco rate case is kicking off today. So, we've got 29 folks, so we got plenty to start things off. And just as a reminder, I'm recording this. Got a few things to get. I see Bob Batunde is already ready to go. He's going to give us a presentation. He's from MEA. He's going to give us a presentation on the multifamily residential EV study. We've got to touch on the joint utilities follow-up comments that they submitted last week. I believe Ethan's going to give us a resiliency presentation as well. Then we have some updates from the two subgroups. Anything before we get moving? All right, Babatunde, how you doing today?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm well. Thank you very much for doing this. I don't know if you volunteered or were voluntold, but either way, appreciate you being here, sir.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me. Let me see if I can get the slides up. So here, righty. Okay, I think I got it. Can everyone see?
Yep, we got it.
All right. All right. So, my name is Babatunde Idrisu. I'm an energy policy manager with MEA. So I'll be running through the MEA's multifamily residential EV study. First of all, I'm just going to give a background. As part of Maryland's efforts to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions, the Climate Solutions Now Act was passed by the Assembly in 2022, with the goals of reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 6% from 2006 levels by 2030, and to reach net zero emissions by 2045. As many of us would know, transportation is a major source of greenhouse gas emissions in Maryland, accounting for at least 35% of emissions. And over time, the state of Maryland has made efforts to try to mitigate emissions from transportation. In 2007, the Maryland adopted the California's Clean Cars program, which was supposed to help to increase the number of zero emissions vehicles sold in the state. Just last year, we adopted the Advanced Clean Cars 2 program, which aims to increase the number of zero emission vehicle sales to 100% by 2035. We also have ambitious goals of reaching 300,000 EV vehicles or zero emission vehicles registered in the state by 2025 and 600,000 by 2030. As part of this transition towards cleaner vehicles, House Bill 830 was passed in the last legislative session, and the goal was it was concerned himself with the readiness of residential buildings for EVSE, that's electric vehicle supply equipment infrastructure. And this bill mandated MEA to look at the costs, the barriers, and the impacts of mandating multifamily residential buildings to install EVSE in their parking lots. So so MEA contracted ACOM to run the study. The goals were to look at the cost implications of mandating multifamily homes to install to be EV ready or have EVSE installed in their parking lots, and then to explore the ratio of EVSE installed parking spaces to dwelling units in multifamily buildings, and also to look at the different payment options. So the first thing we did when conducting this study was to try and understand what the environment is right now as regards EV installations in EVSE, EV and EVSE installation in Maryland. So currently we have close to 100,000 EVs registered in Maryland, and this is an increase from just less than 30,000 in 2020 at the end of the fiscal year 2020. So we are experiencing a growth of about 31% annually. And that includes, and we're experiencing a 31% increase annually. So that is so we then looked at the EVSE distribution in the state. From what we found, it was obvious that a lot of the EVSE installed currently in Maryland is concentrated in the DMV area, urban areas around Washington, D.C. and Baltimore. And as you move further west or further east, you have fewer and fewer, and it's more sparsely dispersed. So that was an interesting observation. Also, as we also looked at the distribution of EVSEs in overburdened and underserved communities. I did bring out one of the maps here, and this was basically EVSE infrastructure within environmental justice communities. To develop this chart, we used MDE's environmental screening tool. MDE's environmental screening tool basically looks at we chose environmental justice scores of between 75% and 100%, which basically represents the most overburdened underserved communities in Maryland. What we found was that there's a proportional number of EVSEs in underserved and proportionate number of EVSEs in underserved and overburdened communities. By that, I mean that the percentage populations in these areas matches up with the percentage of EVSEs installed within the EJs, within the environmental justice areas of 75% to 100%. So after doing that, we tried to project what the future is going to look like, or what the future could look like in Maryland, especially with the adoption of the Advanced Clean Cars 2 program. We're estimating that by 2037, we could have 100% EV registered, EV registered on the roads in Maryland. And that's moving to about over 2 million EV vehicles in the state. This represents 100% of vehicles on the road. We're projecting that in 2035 we could have 82% of EVs on the road, being electric vehicles, and for the business as usual, we project that it's going to be about 64%. I mean, making those projections, we looked at a number of factors. We looked at the historical data. We looked at the cost projections of electric vehicles and internal combustion vehicles. Of course, we looked at the policy environment with the Advanced Clean Cars 2 program, and we looked at the demographics and changing population. Then we tried to estimate the number of EVSE ports that could meet this growth in electric vehicles in the state. And this we made an assumption of about four DC chargers to 1,000 and 60 level 2 chargers to 1,000. That's for public charging. And we'd also assume that by 2050, everyone has the option to charge their electric vehicles at home. So that's why you see relatively higher numbers in terms of the level 2 charging. So MEA and ACOM leverage on internal knowledge because MEA runs the EVSE rebate program to try and estimate the cost of installing one level 2 and DC charger in different types of multifamily homes. As you can see, townhomes comes to around 26,000, and that changes for low rise, high rise, structural parking, and new construction. So that's our cost estimates for building out charging stations in those different types of multifamily residents. The next thing we tried to do was to try to estimate the number of parking spaces in multifamily homes. To do that, we made use of zoning ordinances that regulate the number of parking spaces for the number of units in a home. We looked at available multi-family property data in the open data portal. Unfortunately, we're able to get information regarding the multifamily properties in Maryland, but we couldn't get information regarding the number of units, the unit sizes of those multifamily properties. So to estimate that, we went to the U.S. Census data to identify the number of housing by bedroom quantity in each census tract, and then we used that to in addition with the zonal ordinances to try and estimate the number of parking spaces in different types of multifamily homes. And then from that information, we use that to project what the cost could be, depending on the number of parking spaces that are required to have EVSE or to be EV ready. So for 10%, we can see for townhomes, it ranges from 1.2 billion USD to about 6.1 billion when we move up to 50% of parking spaces. And that could rise up to a total of 7 billion if we mandate that 50% of parking spaces have at least a L2 charging. So we try to, we also made recommendations regarding ways in which the state government could mitigate the cost of trying to build out this charging. One of which is encouraging collaborations between public and private entities to share the cost of EVSE installation, providing infrastructure grants for real estate developers to integrate EVSEs into new construction, tax credits for individuals and businesses investing in EVSE installations, regulatory changes that facilitate flexible and cost-effective electricity pricing structures that benefit the grid and customers, the integration of battery storage solutions for EV charging station, storing energy during low demand periods and utilizing it during peak times could reduce the reliance on the grid. And then incentives and subsidies offered to reduce upfront cost of EVSE installation, making it more attractive and financially feasible. In in the study, we also looked at the different payment options, ranging from free charging down to, you know, an EV user payment method that is the user determines the payment method. For each of these, there are pros and cons, and I would to save us time, I probably won't have to go through each one of them. We also conducted a stakeholder engagement where we sent out a request for information. We received feedback from multifamily condominiums, from nonprofit organizations, from real estate developers, EVSE companies, and some of the challenges and difficulties they expressed include like high costs, lead times, safety concerns, the cell signal challenges, lack of information regarding billing rates, especially with the demand charges, and of course electric load capabilities. That means getting those areas ready for EVS installation, and a host of other challenges that they face. We did make a number of recommendations, including having like more granular data on EV adoptions and EVSE locations on the Maryland Open Data portal. While we could get the available multifamily property data, there wasn't enough information regarding the unit sizes, and that meant we had to be a little more creative in trying to figure out the number of parking spaces in multifamily homes, and then investigating the feasibility of developing EV programs at low-income buildings. This could come, in the form of like ride share, kind of programs, and see how we could promote EVs to areas that typically, at least right now, you have less people being able to afford electric vehicles, and then continue to support financial and educational programs for EV and EVS technology, especially in environmental justice communities. For future research, we propose that we'll need to assess the development of new multifamily construction building, because this assessment looked primarily at the existing building stocks. There is a lack of publicly available data on new construction, and that is an area that would warrant further study. Also, we would want to assess ownership models of EVSEs, and see what best worked, what best, especially for low-income residents, and then we could also test the viability of such ownership models, and then further stakeholder engagement efforts to hold workshops with key stakeholders to discuss policy recommendations and to ensure that EVSE adoption in multifamily buildings is successful. That's all I have. I could take a few questions now.
All right. Thank you very much, Babatunde. Any questions? Go ahead, Paul.
Good morning. I appreciate the overview on your project. I'm mostly interested in stakeholder involvement, and I'm curious as to how successful and what you did in order to involve EJ communities in this study. Were there groups that you did, or how did you do that? I guess is my question.
So we have a list internally on multifamily buildings and property developers, and that is the list that we used out to send out emails. And also we did contacts. We didn't talk about the request of information. We shared it with the ZV group and other stakeholders to to hopefully get their inputs. So we work primarily with the information and the data and the people we already had their information within, and also with other stakeholders in the EV groups that we work with.
So you were able to access folks that are living in EJ communities in your report through a list that you have of communities that you already have. Is that list shared with anybody else, or is this something you have internally?
No, we do have that list internally. It's basically people we have worked with in the past on other programs, and the MEA has worked with. So
is that a listing that would be available like to utilities for their use? Because one of the issues that we're having with the distribution system planning is equity and how that should be addressed. Are you providing incentives to folks to participate in these stakeholders meetings, i.e. some modest remuneration, or how's that going?
we didn't provide any remuneration for the stakeholder input. No.
But you were still getting some participation.
Yes, we did get some participation. I do think that with more, I think the study had a pretty short time frame. I believe that with more time, maybe we could have gotten a lot more feedback. But yeah, we did get some information from stakeholders.
Okay, you talk about your Maryland Open Data Portal. Is that GIS based, where any utility could go in and utilize that for identifying the EJ communities and where their feeders and substations might be?
I do not believe it is. I do not believe it's but I do believe you can get some of the information there. But I do not believe that it's GIS based.
Okay, because one of the issues is always having good data and being able to extrapolate that for other uses. And it sounds like the Maryland Data Portal is still something that's a work in progress.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Ethan.
Just wanted to get a clarification. What were classified as soft costs?
I could have a quick look at that.
If you need to take that offline, that's fine. It was mostly a curiosity question.
Okay, okay, can I have a quick look? Yeah, I could get back to you on that offline.
All right. All right. Thank you, Ethan. Anybody else? Once, twice. All right. Babatunde, thank you very much for doing this today. I really appreciate it.
All right, thank you. Bye
All
bye.
right. All right. Let's see. Ethan, Jacob, you guys want to, or I guess, throw it out there for folks. Any responses to the follow-up comments on the outstanding items that the utilities addressed? It was circulated on the 1st.
I think we're sticking with as written at this point.
Right. Yeah, I was going to throw it out if anyone had any questions or responses. Not in the rate case today, Jacob?
Well, luckily, no. Get to be here instead.
Yeah, I'm sure you are. All right.
Avoiding rate cases after 8 years of them is one of my key career goals these days.
Okay. All right. All right. All right. So oh, yes, Dr. Bartlett.
Oh, yeah. I'm sorry. I was just wondering, is there going to be a presentation of that Starman proposal or?
Yes. Yeah. So my
Yeah.
thought was, we hit MEA, then I was going to have any questions on the joint utilities comments. I was going to ask Ethan then to do his resiliency presentation, and then we were going to jump into the transparency / straw man from the utilities, and then the metrics subgroup report that OPC provided, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, sure, no problem. All right, so if no one has any questions on the follow-up comments, but thank you very much for providing those. Ethan, did you want to do show over that resiliency slideshow you presented, sir, or you provided, sir?
Sure.
Thank you.
I'm new to this presenting in this, so let me know if this is working.
Yep, you nailed it.
Okay, great. So first off, this came out of a lot of different work that's happened over the years, going all the way back to the original attempts by both BG&E and PHI to do microgrid proposals, and this is like 2016. Long years of looking at how to propose resiliency projects and not having them work well in a utility framework. So looking back and trying to understand how we could better present them. So we started working with SEPA. We got in contact with SEPA through the DC grid modernization proceeding MEDSIS, and found a lot of areas we could work together. And the idea was came up with the BG&E and SEPA would develop a resiliency project evaluation tool, which we're going to call the GIS study for want of a better term here, so that we could identify and prioritize critical facilities and natural hazard risks, and the impact in the communities that they would impact. And so first there was an engagement with MEA and MDEM to collect data. And then we added in the federal equity and environmental justice data. That's the identification of disadvantaged communities. You've probably seen it around here. And then we overlaid that with various utility system data. And as you can see from the graphic on the right there, you can see the more detailed what we went into, and there's more detailed down even more, but hosting capacity, substation and circuit locations, reliability statistics, as far as environmental justice, public health was one of the areas we looked at, economic and demographic data, and then of course critical facilities, which means our central customers, the hospitals, fire departments, emergency, as well as natural hazards. Floodplains played a big deal into this. and then the hazard mitigation plans. So a lot of different layers of data came together to build this concept. So what does it do? And got a nice little picture of a Baltimore townhome there. It provides tangible justification for distribution resiliency projects, and a little list of them there. But you know, that was one of the things is we found when trying to talk about resiliency projects was that, you know, we live in a world of BCAs, and BCAs often don't actually help you get to where citing, they can kind of obscure, because of the difficulty with VCAs, some of the value of a project. So, you know, we wanted to bring tangible benefits for resiliency projects from the distribution utility perspective, and then give a locational assessment and precise prioritization. We have these various layers. We know where it should be, and we know which areas have the most needs. And then, you know, it allowed us to consider resiliency projects specifically for our distribution system, and you know, identify the local needs that will be addressed so that we could tailor it. And it allowed for the model is very open. We can layer on it because it's a GIS and data driven. We can layer in more information as we gain it. We also wanted it, because this is a pilot project, we wanted to illustrate how distribution system planning can support policy goals such as the CSNA, and illustrate how community needs can be incorporated into distribution system planning. Again, back to the floodplain. So, application. We did use it. My unsuccessful JET application that was justifying equitable transition, where we proposed a microgrid project for a West Baltimore disadvantaged community. We had a choice between 6 different substations that were identified for retirement under one of our distribution upgrade programs. This allowed us to immediately, using this study, focus in on one of them and say that this study, all this information points us right here. We went down and did a walk down. That's when we actually go out in the field and look at the area, really take in what the distribution infrastructure looks like, the lay of the land, kind of topology you can't just get off of a Google map or a GIS. You know, it's a very good practice to go out and actually see the field. And I was always taken by one of my engineers coming back with the comment, we didn't have to start with a blank page. It took us directly to a community that had the substation adjacent to 2 different disadvantaged communities, with a hospital, a train station within walking distance, as well as the area is subject to flooding. And actually, there was a flooded out street while we were there. So, you know, we think that it has useful for identifying locations for resiliency grants, especially with an environmental justice focus. We can leverage it for our system planning to identify resiliency projects to support critical facilities, again, emergency responders and hospitals, and critical customers, those customers most in need, which this disadvantaged community had. There's a large number of elderly citizens who are dependent on medical devices, and during an outage, that can be a critical problem. We can use it to study solar interconnection applications, to identify areas for collaboration with utility projects. Again, solar always makes a storage project work better because localized generation makes the storage last longer. And then environmental resiliency projects to mitigate the impacts of climate change. And then allow us to add in NW non-wire solution use cases. So that was the GIS study. And again, it's very focused on community, very focused on location. And it has been successfully used once and a half, we'll call it, but we're still in the pilot phase. And we're right now looking to work with SEPA to refresh the data. You know, for instance, reliability data, the system is actually quite dynamic. We need to update the reliability data and the hosting capacity data so that we can get some fresh fresh look at that, how that works. The other study that BG&E, resiliency study that BG&E is involved in is 1898 & Co. And Paul Verchinsky asked me by email what 1898 stands for. I'm not really sure by looking at their website, but they are 1898 & Co. They are a national engineering firm. With them, we came up with a definition of resiliency, and defining resiliency and accounting for resiliency have been struggles for a lot of people, including national labs. There's a lot of discussion out there still. No one's really settled on an exact one, but for the purposes of this study, they came up with the ability to prepare for and adapt to changing conditions, withstand, recover from, and minimize the magnitude and/or duration of disruptive events. Resilience includes the ability to withstand and recover from deliberate attacks, accidents, or naturally occurring threats or incidents. The theory behind it is basically we want to harden the pieces of our system such that our customers, in the event of any of those items that happen in the second sentence there, they withstand it or can be easily replaced, such that we don't end up having to go dip twice into rate base for the same piece of equipment after a brand new piece of equipment has been destroyed. The commission did, and I as a disclaimer, the italics there, that's the commission's decision in the MYP to move this to another proceeding to discuss this, and that's fine. I wanted to include that just as a nod to everyone at the table. We are aware that this study was tabled by the commission, and the resulting projects and that's for further discussion, but just full transparency there. I hope you enjoy the lightning graphic. Okay, so now just close out. I'm not going to walk through all these, but just this gives you a quick a quick view of the difference between the GIS study, how it's focused on not technology and not about BCAs, but about environmental justice and the locations that resiliency would be valued. And then the 1898 study shows you how it's more specific to utilities, wire solutions, includes costs and benefits, and then environmental justice and DAC issues. And one mistake there, I need to fix that. But anyway, that's the whole, that is the two studies we worked on. I think they demonstrate how we are trying to address resiliency as a utility in a way that is, most of all to the benefit of our customers, reducing system costs and focusing in on the locational needs in an area. And I think that is a much more useful way of talking about resiliency than talking about BCAs, talking about defining resiliency. Let's look at where it's needed and understand we know what projects will support it. And that is a great way to focus on it. So now that I've given a great soliloquy here, does anyone have any questions, comments? Would love to get your, yes, David. And thank you, MEA, for being a participant.
You're welcome. When I was in the Navy, a destroyer would have a ring bus, and if a generator went down, they could push a button and they would load shed a third of the loads. And if it got really bad, they could push a button and they load shed another third of the loads. When we're talking about resiliency, the object is to go provide the energy that is needed despite the grid outage or a major event. When you are looking at resiliency, are you trying to go provide 100% of the energy available, and if that was previously available during an outage event, or are you only trying to go provide critical loads, in which case do you have or are you considering a means to go load shed down to the critical loads, such as refrigeration, basic lighting for security, fans, that type of thing? Is that at all part of what BGE is looking at? Because if you can't load shed, then you are subject to the whims of, I'm just going to say, every single marijuana plant grower who decides that keeping 5,000 watts of lights on his plants is worthy, and you just take down the grid. I'm sorry for all marijuana growers, but it's just my question of, you can do all this resiliency, but if you can't enforce a load shed to go ensure only critical loads remain for the maximum amount of time, is that considered in your study?
It is not. This is purely maintaining an area, the GIS study, or maintaining the infrastructure feeding the whole system. A direct load control kind of a feature is something we discussed somewhat with the JET project. When we were considering the microgrid, one of the big questions when we were looking at how to set it up was how much solar would be available to stand up the microgrid. And there was a number of flat roofs, there was some open real estate, and the hospital specifically had a great roof. We looked at that, and we never got to the point of the consideration you bring up, but it was on our minds. How much and what would we want to stand up if we had to make the choice? And that was also something, it was a grid reliability and innovation grant, GRIP. And one of the strong emphasis by the Biden administration was on community engagement. And were we to have gotten that grant and gone through a lot of the other pieces, we did want to discuss with the community that kind of staging, what they would want stood up, what was most important, focusing on those critical customers, the elderly, focusing on buildings. We also we've moved into an area where, as the Baltimore Resiliency Hub project is moving ahead, we're working closely with them to address exactly what you're talking about. Let's focus in on areas where we can use a resiliency hub to create community areas of support. In the event of, we can't support this entire community, let's support an area that will give them some relief from a major outage or disruption. So I'm definitely there with you. That is I would say, a next step kind of question.
But the resiliency hub is supporting key buildings that the community can go to, as opposed to providing energy to all buildings at critical levels only. It's a different concept.
It is, and we are looking at how we can partner with the resiliency hubs, because one of the advantages to the resiliency hubs, and we found I said we've used the GIS study 1.5 times, we've noted that the resiliency hubs coincide a great deal with where our study would point you. And so we are working with the City of Baltimore Sustainability Office and other organizations who some stuff, you've touched on stuff that's under NDA right now, but and we have spoken with you, I think, sideways in a few meetings, some of your people about where we're going with this, but and this leads to someone else's similar study of what we've done, how we can create support areas to make sure that those resiliency hubs have some more backup from us. So,
okay.
Looking for ways to support the city and the hubs is a piece of what we're looking at right now. And really great question. I'm jotting down the DLC thought. Appreciate that.
All right. Go ahead, Paul.
Thanks for the presentation, Ethan. Since JET was a pilot project, I'm kind of curious as to what outreach you did to the communities in that area and how successful you were with it. You're now moving on apparently to the resiliency hubs, but I'm curious what learnings, if anything, you got out of JET for dealing with the communities that you were trying to support.
Really good question. Thank you, Paul. That was I'm going to say JET was transformative for me. I'm not generally a community-facing person. I like technology. I like these policy discussions we have here. That's my comfort area. And JET forced me, not us, out into the community with my community engagement team. We met with the Shipley Hill community. we met with their leadership first, and then we had public meetings with them and sat down and discussed our ideas, to ask what kind of pieces that they liked and didn't like. Committed to keep going with them. When we did not get the grant, it was unhappily we had to go to them and explain that, we would not be able to move forward on this project that we described. That was obviously uncomfortable and sad to have to do. But we learned a lot. I learned a lot about community engagement and about the teams that on BG&E's teams that do this on a regular basis, and how we take in their ideas and make sure that they're aware of what we're doing. And I'm going to say that the first two questions at the first community meeting I attended really stuck with me. First question was, are you going to take our houses away? This is a community in West Baltimore that has been impacted by the terrible history of community redlining. They remember that their communities have been moved aside by big projects, and assuring them that first and foremost that we're not touching their homes, that we want to help improve their community, and a part of their community that really just the area we were looking at was just undeveloped, scrub trees, a flooded street, an old substation of ours. We were looking at how we could improve their community, and actually this area that we were looking at acted as a wedge through their community. They couldn't walk through it, and we wanted to open that up so that we could reconnect their community in a way that zoning had fractured them. So, and that was a really hard question. The other question was, and this is one of my biggest takeaway, why now? And having to tell them honestly, because we realize you've been left behind, because we know that your community has not been centered before. And that, if there's anything this work group can do, if there's anything you could support, I hope we can put together a recommendation, and I volunteer to start writing it and work with any of you, a recommendation that we begin focusing resiliency projects first on these disadvantaged communities who have always been put last and will continue to be put last until we break that cycle. So really appreciate the question, Paul. And if anyone would like to support working on a recommendation from this work group for utility projects supporting disadvantaged communities to reverse and address the history of redlining and the neglect of rural communities and others that have been forgotten, I would very much appreciate that. And I think that would be a great outcome for this work group.
Would be happy to work with you on something like that. I mean, it has been a big issue, and it will continue to be a big issue. But somehow we need to walk and chew gum at the same time, dealing with the EJ communities as well as fulfilling the CSNA. So, that's a juggling act that the commissioners are basically tasked with doing, I believe. Thanks for
I'm in complete agreement. And, I was so happy to see the CSNA talk specifically about resiliency. And, and I grabbed Eli, Al, Paul, Joyce, anyone else want to throw in? I can start drafting tomorrow and get you a basic recommendation. Now, anyone else, please reach out to me by email or in the chat. Really appreciate the time. And let's give the mic back to Judge McLean.
Yeah, no, that sounds like a good idea. I'm sure we can throw that into the report, Ethan. I appreciate you agreeing to take that on, and we can always touch base on that again next week or at our next meeting. Dr. Bartlett, do you have a question, sir?
Well, no, just a couple of observations.
Sure.
One, first, thanks, Ethan. That a great presentation and really interesting and focused on some really important stuff. And yes, to your offer to work on this. I would point out that 7-801 actually specifies equity as part of the CSNA. And so they're not two separate things. But that's good because what it means and how to operationalize it is really a challenge, and this has helped us think that through. Just a couple of points. One, I appreciated the focus on customer impact. When we saw that presentation on resiliency back at the technical session, that was one of the points that was made. There's system impact and customer impact, and particularly the identification of critical customers. So, and I think the discussion with David Comas made the point that there's a difference between electrifying buildings and electrifying customers, because some of these folks actually can't leave their homes. And I'm just wondering, did you come across any way to identify systematically where those households are that have critical needs? Or if not, I know of some resources that through the Energy Advocates Coalition, for example, that works on the intersection between energy and low income, would probably be helpful in figuring out how one might do that. But there may be resources already in some form, or I don't know what they are. So that's just one question. I had another, but do you know of any systematic approach to identifying critical customers?
Let me separate that up into two groups. First, we know exactly, I know for sure we have a list of all of the emergency services that we prioritize during any major restoration effort. As far as the customers with medical and other devices, I believe, but I don't want to say yes for sure. Let me go check my facts on that one. I believe we do have that information. And I'm not exactly sure how. So that is one I should follow up on.
Yeah, and no, that would be really helpful. I mean, just to know that it's possible, because I think that's really the rubber hitting the road in a sense. The other thing is, you've got these two different studies, the GIS study, 1898 study. Both of them obviously have necessary components, and one's focused on systems, one focused on users. So you combined these two, but are you seeing this as something that is likely to be continued to be applied at scale? Is that something that you all are working on doing, or is this simply a pilot?
Well, it's a pilot until we've proved it out. I'm going to go to Eric Henland's crawl, walk, run. We're looking for opportunities to prove out this concept. I have offered it to the city and others if they have a need to look at. We want to see if it's successful for other people and for our projects as it was for identifying jet. You want to make sure you're not working with a bad data set. And but yes, resiliency is definitely a long-term project for us. We proposed a large resiliency program in our last MYP, and I'm looking forward to, and I know the Judge McLean is aware as I am that there is a great chance the commission will be creating a resiliency working group, perhaps as a follow-up to this one when we're done with our report. And that is when we intend to be very engaged in. We have a lot of thinking about resiliency and how resiliency, equity, and how we can address these projects in a way that, 6 years ago, resiliency was treated as a very difficult subject. And now I believe that we have the tools and the concepts to do it correctly. So I hope that answers your question now.
Yeah, just the last dimension, if I may. So you've put these pieces in place. So you've got something that's semi-systematized as a methodology. So would this be likely, I'm not sure how much extra cost this kind of approach takes to resiliency planning, but would this be likely to make it through the present benefit cost analysis filter that the utilities use?
Well, I'm hoping the UBCA work group gives us something different to work with. I would have to throw that question to the strategy and the OPC team. I think, though, from Eli's reaction and the reaction I've seen from other people in OPC, that there's a great conversation we could have between Office of People's Counsel as the representative of the ratepayers and the utilities about how we can come together on this. I have some thinking on, how we can pilot this out, how we can focus on certain communities first. That I'm a big believer, and that's what my T&D World paper is about in many ways, is we know that there are disadvantaged communities that if I lose my refrigerator during a 12-hour outage and have to replace all of my milk and food, that's not great. There are people in these communities who that loss of that refrigerator affects their annual budget. And so focusing on them first, we know that prioritizing them will have maximum impact. And that's one of the ways I feel like we can, mitigate some of the BCA problems and look at where starting these projects, proving them out when a major outage happens and a restoration is going on, knowing that these communities are already taken care of, that they will be fine for while the restoration is going on. They won't lose that refrigerator. They won't lose their medical devices. There's huge value in that. And then eventually that shows us that these projects should be replicated and how we can replicate them equitably. So that's my thinking there.
Thank you.
DeAndre.
Hey, good morning, Ethan and work group. Thanks for that presentation. I just wanted to, well, I'm not sure if you are familiar with the distributional equity analysis framework that has been established by the Department of Energy. And it sounds like that this framework that they have established could be an important tool for approaching the resiliency or energy justice or equity in regards to what it is that you are trying to propose, or this proposal that we're trying to make in regards to energy justice. So I think that would be a pretty good resource for you to use. It is also a resource that is being used in the BCA for DER work group. So if you need, I don't know if you're familiar with it or not, but if you need any resources, I can definitely direct you as to where you can find that report.
Thank you, DeAndre. And I had not heard of that particular one, and would love to see if I can find a way to get that data. Like I mentioned, we are doing a data refresh, and if we could incorporate more of that data into the GIS study, that would be excellent. Should I put you down as a member of the resiliency group?
Yeah, sure.
Fantastic. Glad to have a member of staff on board.
DeAndre, could you put a link in the chat, please?
Sure.
Thank you.
All right. Any other questions for Ethan on his presentation? All right, Ethan, thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Thank you for the time, sir.
Absolutely. All right. Next up, Jacob, are you going to do the straw man update?
Yeah, I can provide an update from the subgroup and walk through the straw proposal that I sent around yesterday. Let me share my screen. Let me know if you can see the document.
We got it now. Okay,
perfect. So the transparency subgroup has had 2 meetings where we were obviously focused on developing and identifying the transparency and engagement points within the JADE process map, and we used the original utility proposal as a framework and really kind of built off of that and developed it. Had a lot of great conversation, a lot of feedback, and really worked to incorporate that within this document. And I think what ultimately came out of it is really responsive to the order 90777, and is really looking to adhere to kind of the policy that the state's identified. It's anchored in the JADE process. It's giving stakeholders opportunities for transparency. It's creating discrete points to participate within a DSP process. It's looking to help reduce some of the administrative burden through that transparency and engagement. And really, it's looking to balance, the goal of public transparency and effective participation with the utilities' operational needs. And something we kind of work through within the subgroup is we identified multiple points within the JADE process that made sense for transparency and engagement. And in order to really try and maximize stakeholders' value and time within this process, we tried to condense all those points of engagement down to a few steps to help support, driving just engaging as effectively as possible and really maximizing all parties' value and time within the process. So those are the steps that are reflected here, but fully recognize that this is very much anchored in multiple points of engagement within the JADE process. And that's reflected. I tried to reflect that, mapping it out at the end of this document. So going through, we have just some high-level information. Obviously, again, trying to connect each of these steps within this process to the JADE process boxes that we have talked through. And this is what's reflected here. So some of the key points that we identified was this report would be completed at a minimum every 3 years. As we've talked about in the working group, it would cover the 3 scenarios that the group has discussed, and ensuring that time horizons extend at a minimum beyond 10 years, recognizing all the discussions we've had as a working group that we want to have a longer time horizon for utilities. But all this is framed in a way that utilities still have flexibility to align the process cycle or those time horizons to best fit what their existing processes are to continue to meet that flexibility. Continue to have points, and these are a few that Paul had brought up that were very good suggestions, is the utilities may consider adding educational sessions ahead of this process to help inform stakeholders of what this will look like, to just make it easier for that engagement. And they may also consider partnering with third parties to help facilitate that stakeholder feedback and engagement, recognizing certain community engagement groups exist that may help engage different stakeholders throughout this.
Hey, Jacob, can I ask a quick question on the educational sessions? So, the utilities may consider that. So obviously, you may not consider it. So I was just wondering, obviously, this is a draft document, and it'll probably change over time. Do you have any kind of ideas as to when it may not be appropriate to have an educational session, or maybe just a trial and error type thing, or?
Yeah, I think we left it as may, again, just driving towards the flexibility for utilities, right? They may take different, whether they want to do a webinar, in-person sessions, different things like that.
Sure.
What frequency they want to do it, just allowing the utilities to be able to define what that may look like.
Sure. So it sounds like the utilities are on board with doing some type of educational session, but the format, frequency, et cetera, remains to be determined.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so continuing on into the steps. So step 1 is around data collection, and this is really an opportunity for the utilities to collect data that is going to be included in the process from stakeholders, recognizing that there are parties that have information that is relevant to the analysis to be run, and wanting to make sure we're engaging with those stakeholders in that. And so we list out some of the data that we think to be collected. It's not necessarily all inclusive, but the data that we think to be collected, prioritizing, what are the policy goals, both from the CSNA, as well as local municipalities or county governments may have goals of their own that should be, considered incorporated into the planning. Obviously, working with customers around their existing electrification or DER investment plans to be able to reflect that within the planning, and capturing any trends. And so we identified, again, some key stakeholders who we think may directly have some of this information, but it's not an all-inclusive list, and the process is still designed to be open, to all parties. And so the way that's reflected is, with a lot of these groups, the utilities already have some of these relationships, right? We have relationships with MEA, with OPC, with staff. We have relationships with the counties and many of our large customers. Those relationships already exist, and we can continue to use those avenues to engage those stakeholders. And then we want to continue to allow some ability for all parties to participate. And so some type of kind of informal RFI hosted on the utilities website would be kind of the thought here, that there'd be a time-bound window where parties are able to provide the utilities some of this information for them to be able to consider in the process, and making sure that this time-bound window is sufficiently long to allow stakeholders to actually be able to effectively participate. So this is a great opportunity for us to hear from stakeholders about what they're looking to do, and creates that point of engagement. Step 2 is around aligning on inputs and assumptions. This is really about the utilities kind of presenting what we're intending to be the inputs and the assumptions that are going to inform our analysis, and before the utilities run the analysis, giving stakeholders the opportunity to provide any feedback at that step. So again, touching on the JADE process boxes, here start to outline what information would the utilities be putting out there as kind of that draft of like, this is what we are planning to align around. Much of this has to do with adoption rates for the load forecasting, for DER forecasting. How does the technologies and operational characteristics feed in all of that? This will be published on the utility website, and again, some time-bound window that's sufficiently long for stakeholders then to be able to review that information and provide that feedback back to the utilities. So we're really trying to create a point for transparency as well as engagement here for stakeholders to participate in the process. Step 3 is really, heads down work from the utilities. Utilities putting pencil to paper, or I guess more like fingers to keyboards nowadays. But this is where we're running the process and doing the analysis based off the assumptions from step 2 and any considerations and adjustments from feedback that were made from step 2. Performing the forecasting, performing the solutions analysis, the system constraints, all those steps that we've talked about within the JADE process are completed here. And ultimately that lands within step 4, which is where the utilities would publish some type of report to be able to then receive feedback. And so the idea here is this is a draft report, or effectively the first version of the report. It is going to capture a lot of information in terms of any lessons learned, utility roadmap, and then some of the information that came out of step 3 in terms of the forecast, in terms of responses to step 1 and step 2, and capturing that kind of conversation, as well as, this is the opportunity for stakeholders to be able to provide feedback and comment on potential proposed solutions that the utilities are considering before, importantly, this is before, steps towards capital investments are starting to occur, and before that is initiating. So opportunity for those stakeholders to review some of those proposed solutions and be able to provide feedback. There was one point of non-consensus within the subgroup here. So the consensus was that this report would be filed, published to the utility website, similar to some of those other publishings, and would be filed with the commission. The point of non-consensus is OPC and Paul had recommended that it would be filed for approval purposes, and the utilities all recommended that it would be filed for informational purposes, which I believe aligns with the order. Again, there would be some type of either time-bound window that's connected to some type of docket in terms of a filing that stakeholders would then have opportunities to provide the feedback through. And finally, the last step is the utilities are now receiving this feedback and looking to either incorporate that feedback or at least responding to that feedback as appropriate before moving forward ultimately with their plan. And so that gets to the end of the processes, and I know this is sideways, so I'm sorry for everyone having to tilt their head a little bit, but just trying to map out to the JADE process, right? Where are all these points of engagement, whether it's a data collection engagement, whether it's the utilities looking to receive feedback, or it's just creating that transparency that we've been talking about. And you can see we're really trying to hit on it within each of these boxes multiple times, really. And so that's where we felt these steps kind of help condense those points of engagement and maximize our time together. And the last slide is just, again, kind of picturing that out in a little bit more of a spiderweb fashion, just to show just how many points are touched there. So I'll pause there. Any thoughts, questions, or feedback?
So there's that point of contention in terms of the filing of the plan, whether for informational or approval. Those were really the only main points of contention you had.
Yeah, in terms of in the document, we really,
Okay.
at least as the last meeting, came to consensus on everything else within it and came to alignment on the language. And it was really just that one point specifically that was, non-consensus. Okay. I just wanted to make sure we captured that.
Sure. Yes, absolutely. And I know there was some discussion several meetings ago about the type of a process. And I know it sounds like OPC is envisioning something different, but are you still envisioning like an Empower type hearing process, or if you're familiar at all with those?
I'm less familiar with him.
Okay, like a less formal, not a full-fledged evidentiary hearing.
Yeah, I think our thought obviously is it'd be filed.
Right.
Certainly not an evidentiary hearing. Not necessarily looking for approval from the commission, recognizing these are utility investments and utilities bear that responsibility. It's more about laying out the plan and allowing parties to engage and provide feedback to inform it.
Okay. All right, great. Got a couple questions. Paul and then Eli.
Yeah, I'd like to commend Jacob for the work that he's done. I think this is a pretty darn good improvement from the first version that we were dealing with. I do want to bring up one item that I brought up a number of times that we really did not discuss because of time constraints, and it basically focuses on the EJ communities. I mean, the folks that live there are working 2 and 3 jobs, very limited time availability. So mechanics and what we do are vastly different from getting the Sierra Club and other folks involved on different issues. They've got the resources to do it. What I frankly would like to see is that folks in those circumstances are remunerated for their time. I mean, everybody that's on this call, with the exception of a couple people, basically are remunerated through the rate base for what they're doing. And I honestly believe that if you want to reach the EJ communities, you're going to have to provide some kind of remuneration. I mean, I don't see it working otherwise. I heard what MEA said, that they worked through some groups, and I deliberately asked the question of, what they were doing for remuneration. The question is, how wide of a tent do you want, and what kind of feedback do you want? So I'm putting that on the table for the wider group to really think about. I mean, it's an item that I do want to bring up with the commissioners. I mean, everyone who gets electricity in the state of Maryland is a customer. They should have a voice in what's going on. So that's kind of my observation. I think we did a good job, but there is an issue with the mechanics, I think. Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, Eli, and then Ethan, and then Al.
Yeah, thanks. And want to second Paul's comments. This is definitely an improvement upon the previous draw, so thank you for this. And just to clarify OPC's position, and we're going to get into presenting this in a little bit. We put together a straw proposal, which does include what an ongoing DSP process looks like, which goes a little bit beyond. I guess I would characterize it as going kind of beyond what the current proposed approach is by the utilities. I will say that this does seem to be a pretty decent approach nonetheless. So we appreciate the utilities' efforts here. We regardless think our approach just kind of has more teeth to it. There are more kind of explicit parameters around it, specified opportunities for engagement and how that engagement should occur. Kind of, we try to lay out a detailed timeline, et cetera. But if there is, you know, a process going forward that finds something workable somewhere, you know, that incorporates some of the utility proposed pieces within the approach that we're proposing, I think that would likely be a workable outcome. But nonetheless, this is certainly an improvement on what we saw initially.
Eli, in other words, you'd like to see kind of some of the aspects of the utility straw man linked with what you guys have proposed.
Yeah, I think there are a couple elements of the utility strawman that I am finding particularly helpful that we didn't necessarily bake into our structure. Like there are some points where they kind of laid out, you know, specific categories that stakeholders could be involved in, like discussing assumptions related to forecasts. I think those elements that the utilities laid out in that framework were really helpful. Those could be brought into our framework. Yeah, I would want to go through, you know, maybe more like with a fine tooth comb and see where these things can be merged. But I think there's certainly an opportunity to do so. Okay, very good. All right, thank you, sir. All right, Ethan.
And always slow on finding my microphone. I want to go back to Paul's comment about the remuneration for disadvantaged communities. There was in DC during the MedSys proceeding, 2018 grid modernization proceeding, that was where I first heard resiliency hubs presented, and there was an anthropologist actually was one of the people who came up with the concept, an anthropologist turned lawyer, and she had developed a very interesting way of addressing that problem, which was that holding community meetings in community centers, and that would be like either literal community centers, churches, other places that these communities are centered on already. And at those places providing food, childcare, and even some small payment for the time of the participants in order to address exactly what Paul was talking about. I put that out there because it was very workable for the district. They did have some successful resiliency hub discussions using that model. So I wanted to put that out there for people. I don't know that I can find the original paper anymore. It's been 6 years, but that was the basic concept. So if people are interested in that, be happy to, perhaps we need to have a resiliency and equity offline discussion. That would be helpful to people. That would be something we might be able to fit in before April 30th.
Well, maybe you weave it into, you know, the discussion you want to have about, you know, prioritizing these communities with resiliency projects. Maybe you can try and give a overview as to how better to engage the community.
I would be happy to include that facet. Yeah. Thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Yeah. Be careful what you volunteer for. All right. We got Al, DeAndre, and then David.
Yeah, thanks. And just to echo, I think the positive comments about this document, I think, has gone a long way and follows very well. I think it lays out very well sort of a flow of process that would make a lot of sense in terms of participation. The one point that I'm just asking, in a sense, for a plain English clarification, because it's entitled Distribution System Planning Report, and so I think it may be that in step 5, what we're talking about is actually stakeholder input into the proposed plan itself. I think that I've worked a lot on programs, and so there are plans which are looking forward, and there are reports which basically say what happened that look backward. But I think that the key thing that stakeholders really want to see is input into the plan that's being proposed, not just a review of what happened in the past. So the language confuses me a little bit. I'm not sure what's really intended in terms of, for example, publication of the report and then stakeholders have another whack at it, but it's not clear whether we're actually talking about interacting with the plan that's being put on the table as the proposal for the next cycle. That's what I think would be essential. I would also say that in the OPC document, that language goes back and forth. In the same section, they use the term report and plan. And I mean, that's a substantial and very important and good document as well. But I just think we need to get clear whether we're talking about involving in the forward-looking part, the planning, or in the backward-looking part, the reporting. I mean, we need to do both, but I think the most important thing that stakeholders want is to have some say about what's being proposed to plan.
Okay. All right, thanks. Jacob, any thoughts on that? Sounds like it's more of a terminology.
Yeah, we can definitely look to tweak the language. I think obviously it is a forward-looking, the report is a forward-looking plan, right? There's the plan that the utility is looking to do. I think it is absolutely looking to receive feedback on that plan and make adjustments as appropriate from the stakeholders' feedback, on that plan, before it goes forward. So not necessarily backwards looking, but it's, I wouldn't necessarily say a proposal necessarily, because that implies pending approval, but it's the utilities plan, which can always be certainly altered based off of stakeholder feedback. But I can definitely tweak the language to kind of help clarify that some.
Okay, awesome, thank you. And to the extent you do any tweaks, any chance you can do them kind of in track changes, just so we can see what you changed? Awesome, thank you. All right, DeAndre.
Yes, thank you, Chuck, and thank you, Jacob, for this proposal. I think we've had some discussions in regards to the customer education, or educating them on the benefits of distributed energy resources, and just some of the projects and plans that you all may have moving forward in regards to the distribution system planning, integration of distributed energy resources. But I know this is just a draft and probably pretty early, but do you have any more information in regards to how you all might plan on approaching educating the public? Because I think we've had discussions about it before. What I've seen is that the miseducation of communities can sometimes deter projects from actually moving forward, and that can result in stranded cost or dead costs that then have to be somebody's got to pay for it. It has to be determined how this money is going to be spent. So we definitely caution in regards to how investments are being made and how those intended projects transpire or do come to fruition. So how do you all, at this moment, do you all have like a plan as to how you will educate some of the community to be more open to the adoption of clean energy?
Yeah, I'll let Ethan take this one. I think he has some thoughts here.
Well, DeAndre, we've definitely have seen with the battery pilots between PEPCO and BG&E a range of reactions, and realizing that not all of them have been positive. And what has worked, we do recognize that increased community engagement is definitely vital for these projects. People are getting some they are perceiving these kind of projects as sometimes as an experiment or as an environmental justice issue, where this is being foisted on their community. And especially with my focus right now on these resiliency for equity, I recognize that is going to be a hurdle that is going to be addressed, because here I am saying I want to bring these projects directly to the communities that need them most. But if that community views my project with suspicion, obviously that is going to stop the community engagement that Paul and I have been discussing a lot today. And so, really, we are very aware that the education and the early engagement has to come first. You've got to be prepared to listen to the stakeholders, understand their concerns, bring them the information about how this is a benefit and about the kind of mitigation for their concerns that we are approaching. So, it is a difficult subject, but it is one that we are aware of and are working on. And, I've been really impressed to see that our community engagement teams are becoming a larger part of our business as we quit being the old utility that just slapped down a substation and moved on. That model going back to 1912, we're moving into becoming engaged with our communities and addressing their needs specifically and bringing them solutions as a distribution provider is very important to the model we're moving to. So really appreciate you bringing this up, and always appreciate any help you all bring us, any ideas for how we can approach communities better with information about how DERs can benefit them. One of the big programs I think that BG&E has been working on that really helps is our workforce development program, where we partner with various groups to educate the community members about how they can actually become part of building and maintaining chargers, building and maintaining LED street lighting, the kind of things that are already going to be out in their community. Having people that are a part of that community who are employed in it, who understand the technology, that is a huge step towards helping those communities both economically and to understand and be ready to accept these new technologies. So I hope that helped.
Yes, it does. Thanks a lot. And thank you all for your efforts and this, engaging stakeholders a little bit more in some of these plans. But I want to also add that there's been a recent study that was released by Berkeley Laboratories in regards to peer influence in residential solar adoption. And so what they've found based on their study is that there has been a correlation between the adoption of solar in regards to peers or other people in a particular community that may adopt solar, that convince or kind of influences the adoption of solar by others in that community. And so when you're approaching these communities, maybe look at some of the notable figures or notable businesses or establishments in those communities to maybe approach them to adopt some of the clean energy technology or DER. And that way just based on this study, it's saying that, having those types of establishments adopt solar or DER can help with the total, others in the community to adopt those technologies. And I think that's a part of the education as well. Seeing someone else adopting or utilizing DERs or solar can convince others that this may be something that they can adopt.
Thank you for this. And I would love to read the study. And I'm sorry, I'm going to go grid mod nerd now on all of you. That matches a anecdotal, not data we've observed but not really studied, of how feeders will work. One person on a feeder gets solar, and that's often how we end up with that fifth person who puts the feeder over the line, and is the one who is then shocked, gets sticker shock from what the upgrades needed that they triggered in particular. So that's interesting that somebody finally put that to some data, because that is something we've observed. And it also, DeAndre, to your point, one of the ideas behind JET, I mentioned that that community was fractured by zoning and this just waste area that broke up their community where they had to go around it. One of the things we wanted to do with that was make it into more of a park area with a DER educational center, and not like an enclosed space, but rather we were going to have what are called solar trees, which are they're these they look basically like metal trees with solar panels on them. They're decorative in many ways. They're aesthetically pleasing. That would have included Wi-Fi charging and Wi-Fi provide Wi-Fi for the area, or device charging and provide Wi-Fi to the area, and LED lighting to bring light to the area, and other DERs to specifically bring them to the community so that they could see those items interacting with their lives. And so really appreciate you bringing this up, and I've definitely got to find that study now. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks.
All right, thank you. Anybody else? Yes, go ahead, Samrat.
Thanks, Jacob, for a great presentation. So just wanted to, and I missed some group meetings on transparency, so I apologize if this has already been discussed before. And my question might be a little in line with what Al said earlier about reports and plans. Is there, in these reports, is there going to be a discussion about the progress that has been made in executing the DSP plan towards meeting the CSNA?
Yeah, so within the report, we had a section in terms of roadmap, and that's really where utilities are able to talk through how they're moving towards best practices and developing the DSP process, and how that's evolving towards a lot of what's looking to be incorporated within those goals, and what's how that's being incorporated into DSP, recognizing, I think we've talked throughout the working group that utilities are in one place. We're talking a lot about best practice, and there's going to have to be some time and some evolution that the utilities take to incorporate all those best practices. And so there was a section within the report on step 4 around utilities talking about that roadmap and how that's continuing to develop.
Okay, thanks. So there would be some discussion, I guess, is what I'm taking.
Yep.
All right, thanks.
David.
Thank you. Two things. One is that just before the pandemic, I was running a grant for a different purpose, but one of the things that came back was when you're working with underserved, overburdened communities, that if you want to talk to them, you basically need to go provide a meal, and you need to provide childcare if you're going to do the meeting in the evenings, and that's basically the only time they can do it. I would also say that there is a organization called Groundswell that is working with Baltimore City right now, but has a DOE grant that looks very much into the community organization for resilience. They also provide meals at their meetings for when people come there. I don't know if there's other remuneration or not, but I attended one of their meetings. It was well attended. The meals were important. The problem is DOE doesn't allow any of the money to be used for food. So potentially that needs to come from some other source. But the food and childcare and evening meetings outside of working hours seem to be a big key, and anybody that is interested in the work that they're doing, because they're working not only with Baltimore City, but also with Montgomery County, and then they're going to, when they finish Montgomery County, they're going to start looking at an Eastern Shore County, so that they get urban, suburban, and then rural. Talk to David Wright at Groundswell. Again, that's David Wright, W-R-I-G-H-T, at Groundswell. And the name of the grant is the RACER, R-A-C-E-R, RACER grant. That's all I wanted to say.
All right, thank you. Appreciate that. Ethan, I'm sure you're furiously writing all that down. If not, we've got it captured for historical purposes. All right.
Not only that, I sent David an email.
Oh, excellent. Very good. Even better. All right. Anybody else for the utility updated, new and improved straw man? I think Jacob, I guess you spearheaded this, but everybody, very impressive that, only one point of contention there. So I think that's a job well done. So, all right, with that, why don't we move on to the OPC metrics filing that they sent around yesterday. I realize everybody may not have had a huge opportunity to look at this, so if we have to discuss this over a couple meetings, that's fine. And Eli, I guess you're presenting.
Yeah, happy to.
All right, and I will tell everyone this is it's a sad day for the work group. This will be Eli's swan song. He's moving on to greener pastures, more renewable pastures. So you will be missed. I appreciate all your contributions thus far, and wish you luck.
Yeah, thanks, Judge. Much appreciated. Yeah, unfortunately, this will be my last meeting, at least for the time being, of this work group. But I'm going to keep tabs on you all, and make sure.
I know you'll be following. You're a subscriber to the YouTube channel, so.
Yeah, absolutely. There's no better way to spend a Thursday night than to watch the conversation from earlier. So I'm looking forward to it. But thanks, Judge. And it's also, I just want to say it's been really awesome working with this whole work group. It's been a really productive phase, and I'm really happy to see that we've driven towards a lot of consensus. We've gotten a lot clearer on recommendations, and hopefully what we're getting in front of you all today can help guide the work group to the finish line. But first, I think we'll start with the metrics focus proposal, and then we can do kind of the broader straw thereafter. Give me just a second while I pull this up.
Seconding Eli's note that this has been much more productive, and thank you, and also a motion that we do the metrics and then adjourn for lunch and then come back.
Second.
I figured that would be the case. That works for me.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's they got a potential document to go through, so I didn't want to deprive anyone from lunch. All right. Go ahead, Ethan.
All right. Can you guys see it? Is it coming through clearly?
Eli, I'm sorry. Yes.
Yeah, all good. Okay, cool. Hopefully folks can read my dark screen. I find this easier on the eyes. Okay, so this is a metrics-focused straw proposal. We have met a couple of times with the subgroup. Thank you to subgroup members for providing feedback and getting the straw proposal to where it's at today. As the judge noted, and as I started to mention, we have a separate, broader, kind of totally holistic straw proposal, which we'll get to after lunch. So to kick off with just a little bit of a high-level overview, throughout the course of this phase of the work group, it became clear that metrics should be determined for future tracking and reporting purposes as part of distribution system planning. There was agreement from the work group on that generally, and so the strategy and OPC team took the next steps of developing a framework centered around metrics and reporting on those metrics. Just to provide background, I won't read through all the goals, but folks are familiar with the CSNA policy goals, which is kind of where this all comes from. The idea of the metrics that we recommend below is to track each utility's general progress towards improving their DSP processes, getting better at deploying DER, and then enabling the state's progress towards policy goals. We know there's significant overlap across the 12 state policy goals. Of course, really it's 11. The last one's kind of a catch-all. Some of the policy goals are focused on operational goals for the distribution system. Others are more societal. And then others kind of focus on the deployment of DERs. And so that's kind of how we got to this overarching framework, which we group by reliability, DER integration, and grid management metrics. We also include metrics relevant towards ensuring vulnerable communities are reasonably included and reflected within reporting. Now getting to consensus versus non-consensus. The overarching consensus position is that all subgroup stakeholders agree that additional metrics in some form or another should be tracked and reported on. Where folks disagree, and apologies, Judge, I didn't get quite as far as I would say Jacob maybe did as far as consensus goes. But stakeholders are split in terms of what the mechanism looks like first. So non-utility parties generally recommend the development of a new consolidated reporting process. Most of these stakeholders recommend a utility produced report, though one recommended a commission produced report. If folks want to speak to their opinions, feel free after I provide this overview. Under the general consensus non-utility opinion, all metrics included below would be captured in the report. A lot of these metrics are captured in existing reports, but several stakeholders, including OPC and Stratagen, felt that the reports are disparate, they are difficult to locate, and then they're particularly difficult to parse through and then be able to actually understand, digest, and interpret that data. And so that just represents that further supports the need for consolidation from our point of view. The joint Exelon utilities, on the other hand, recommend reporting continue through the existing reporting structures, and we'll get into what some of those reports are, and that any new metrics recommendations from the distribution system planning work group be passed along for consideration to those proceedings that govern those reports, like the Empower proceeding governing the Empower report, et cetera, et cetera. And those existing proceedings should have the final determination as to what those metrics look like. According to the joint Exelon utilities, this would avoid duplicative reporting, which is administratively inefficient and burdensome for the commission and can create confusion for the audience as to where metrics are located, and is also a poor use of customer funds. Also, according to the joint Exelon utilities, their approach would allow stakeholders who currently don't participate in the DSP work group but do participate in the other proceedings to have a voice in what metrics the commission considers for tracking achievement of state policy goals here. Now, the second area where stakeholders are split is which metrics should be reported on. Non-utility parties, again, please someone feel free to jump in if folks feel like I'm mischaracterizing anything, but I believe non-utility parties who were involved in the subgroup recommend that all the below metrics be included in this new consolidated report. The joint Exelon utilities support the below metrics being reported on with the exemptions noted in the comments below. And utility folks, please do let me know if I missed any exemption, but I do think I was able to capture all of the updates in this consensus piece and below. So we'll get there. The way we structured this, kind of the remainder of this, is that we first highlight metrics that are already tracked and reported on in various existing reporting mechanisms. And then we also highlight metrics within that same category, for example, reliability, that are not captured in existing reports that we recommend be captured. Again, non-utility stakeholders generally recommend be captured in this new consolidated overarching report, and utility folks recommended they just be added. Again, but be determined within those work groups specifically. So starting with reliability, we recommend metrics be tracked for vulnerable communities in addition to system aggregated reliability metrics where possible. Utilities currently file these system aggregated metrics in accordance with docket 9353. So we recommend reporting on SAIDI, SAIFI, and CAIDI, which are already reported on, but we recommend the reports also capture additional metrics, including SAIDI contribution from overload caused outages, number of customers on each feeder, whether each feeder serves a vulnerable community and the reliability of those feeders, and then planned investments to improve system reliability. I may not read every single metric just for the sake of the, everyone's time and hunger. Moving on to the next section is DER integration. The utilities currently file interconnection metrics in the small generator interconnection report. They file all of these metrics. I'm not going to get into the weeds here, but we're talking about, things that you would see in an interconnection report. So these are like number and nameplate capacity, and, applications and what was denied, what was accepted, et cetera, for various DER interconnections. They're broken down according to various categories, the various levels of interconnection requests, number of applications that were and were not withdrawn, et cetera. As a stakeholder group, we recommend the reports capture the following additional metrics that relate to DSP. 5 years of historical data related to number and nameplate capacity of applications, metrics in vulnerable communities related to nameplate capacity and number of applications, and then smart inverter activation for solar, solar plus storage, and standalone storage. We included several subcategories here. This is one of the exemptions recommended by the Exelon utilities. They recommend removal of these two subcomponents here. But the other stakeholder groups recommend the non-utility stakeholders generally support their inclusion here. And this was just kind of an overall set of metrics focused on DER integration. Next, we get into DER specific metrics. So the first category is solar. There's currently an RPS report that records this metric here, percent of consumed electricity coming from solar. We recommend the reports capture the additional following metrics that relate to DSP, these aggregate deployment metrics. Number of systems and megawatts of nameplate capacity interconnected. Again, we're talking about solar here, including in vulnerable communities. And then total capacity of community solar and number of community solar customers in those communities. On the storage metrics side, we recommend the reports capture all of these new storage metrics. Again, you're seeing similar kind of structure here, total energy storage in megawatts deployed, number of systems deployed, expected to be deployed in vulnerable communities again, and then broken down by a number of kind of specific categories. We provide a couple of examples of how storage deployment is tracked in Connecticut. So these are maps that are used in Connecticut today, which we found to be a generally a best practice used among current jurisdictions. On the EV side of things, we do recognize that that utilities are not directly responsible for customers purchasing EVs, but of course, charging infrastructure certainly plays a big part in that. And given the state's 300,000 EV target goal, we believe that Maryland should set targets for the number and type of EV charges that will be required to support the 300K EVs. And Babatunde's presentation in that regard this morning was very helpful, so we appreciate that. The utilities today currently file semi-annual reports on the EV charger pilot, which details utility-owned charger information. But in addition to these specific metrics, we recommend the reports capture several additional metrics to monitor EV charging and the progress towards achieving EV-related targets. Again, the Exelon utilities recommend an exemption of a couple of these specific metrics, but the rest of the work group recommends including these: number of EVs registered in the state, number of those of charging ports deployed versus estimated charging needs, and then the same thing kind of broken down under a few different categories like single family, private, public, public DCFC, etc. We've got a number of other recommended metrics as well. Again, these are all relatively similar structure to kind of the other DER specific metrics you've seen in this section. They get into nameplate capacity. They include focus on vulnerable communities. And we try to break these down into categories to better understand how these things are being used wherever possible. The last major section is grid management. Grid management is just becoming increasingly important as flexible interconnections will be increasingly deployed on the system, as demand flexibility programs will be used increasingly, and as DER deployment increases in general. So we recommend the following metrics be tracked and reported on to monitor the progress towards a modernized DSP approach, including grid management. These are broken down into aggregated peak load, where we have a couple of submetrics or a couple of specific metrics recommended. Noting here, the Maryland utilities do file semi-annual reports within Empower and the EV docket regarding EE and demand response program metrics. So some of those are reiterated here, focusing on energy efficiency programs. Several metrics focus on demand response programs. And then we also break down a couple into time of use dynamic pricing and then EV charging programs. Also under the grid management section, we've got non-wire solutions subsection. Right now, the non-wire solutions are largely focused on long-term capacity projects. However, we recommend additional categories of metrics to consider in the near future. The Exelon utilities, again, with this metric, have noted they recommend exempting it from this report, the total number and cost of capital investments for non-wire solutions. In terms of the categories of metrics to consider in the future, this should say 3 overarching categories of metrics that should be reported by utilities once the utilities have developed the capabilities to report on these metrics. So to be clear, our understanding is today utilities do not have the capabilities to report on all these metrics, but we recommend that utilities deploy the capabilities to do so, and then they be able to track and report on these metrics within the next 3 to 5 years. Within this category, we talk about, and these, by the way, kind of relate to non-wire solutions, at least mostly. Energy storage flexibility, so total megawatt and percentage of storage systems available to provide the following services, which focus on things like peak shaving and load leveling, power quality, participating in wholesale markets, acting as a microgrid, etc. Flexible interconnection. Flexible interconnection has been further advanced in the interconnection work group in its latest phase, where the flexible interconnection options were adopted by the commission just a couple of months ago. And so as these flexible interconnections are expected to increase, there should be tracking of the various metrics related to those flexible interconnections, how they've enabled things like volt var and volt watt, the number and capacity of those systems, which of those systems are able to be controlled through DERMS or active network management, et cetera. And then lastly, a load demand response section, which is generally kind of, again, focused on monitoring and control for demand response systems on the grid. That is an overview of our metrics proposal. Maybe what I'll just lastly tack on is that, we foresee, like a pretty reasonable path forward where
I would expect nothing.
Go ahead, Judge. Sorry, I missed you.
I would expect nothing less than a reasonable path forward from
Well, what I was going to say is a reasonable path forward to effectively overlaying these metrics on top of the reporting mechanism that we're recommending in the overarching straw.
Right.
I also think, if the utility proposed stakeholder engagement approach is ultimately adopted, this metric reporting approach could potentially flow into that reporting structure. But we would recommend in the annual DSP reports, which we're gonna talk about in the next presentation post lunch, these metrics could and should be reflected within that reporting process, so that stakeholders in the commission can easily interpret and understand kind of how utilities are progressing towards achieving CSNA goals and towards improving their DSP processes to achieve those CSNA goals. But I've been talking for long enough, so let me pause there.
No, you're doing well. And I know you said you didn't get as much consensus as Jacob, but I'm very pleasantly surprised with the amount of agreement you guys have. So it's nothing, I would have been shocked if you guys had, this is great, at least from my perspective. So, all right.
Thank you.
Any reactions? I know I've got some questions, but I don't want to hog it up. All right. Well, yeah, they're rolling in now. All right. Why don't we go with David and then Jacob, and we'll start with that. David, go ahead.
Eli, when every single request for data has a price to it. And so I guess my question is, as we were adding each of these metrics on, was there a clear use of the data, and either a clear use that we know of now, or a clear decision that would require this data, as opposed to, yes, we're looking at this data and we're collecting it, but there is no specific use or decision that will come from this data at this time?
Yeah, that's a helpful question, David. So the way that we would envision this, again, we would envision this being part of the DSP report, which we are recommending be filed in, we'll get to this after lunch, but we're recommending it be filed in draft form with stakeholders. It then be filed with the commission for approval, and also utilities be required to file informational filings thereafter. And the purpose of all of these generally is to gauge utility progress towards modernizing DSP approaches, towards being able to achieve the CSNA goals. So the latter would be from our perspective, the primary purpose of these reports is to understand how well utilities are performing in terms of the state being able to meet its stated policy objectives. And so that's also kind of the idea behind the consolidated report. If all of this information can be provided in one consolidated area, it can help the audience of the report better understand to what extent utilities are actually meeting the goals that they are, directed to meet under CSNA.
So each data request is mapped to a CSNA goal.
I guess I wouldn't use the term data request, and perhaps I may not be familiar with a Maryland process here. Data requests are often referred to like as discovery or information requests in most other states. We wouldn't view these as data requests. We would view these as, these are things that the utilities are not necessarily asked to report on like an ad hoc basis, but rather are required to consistently track and report on and file these reports annually that provide an overview of all these metrics. But yes, all of these, in our view, are ultimately tied to achievement of CSNA goals and improvement of DSP approaches and processes to achieve those CSNA goals.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Eli, I would, to tag on to your answer there, I think I agree that, we haven't explicitly tied them to each to a goal, but I think that they probably more or less could be. And I think they also each tie back to, particularly as we get into the OPC straw proposal, they do, pretty solidly tie back to some of these other recommendations that we're making around how these processes should work and what kinds of capabilities we'd like to see, and essentially validating that those capabilities are being implemented, because if those capabilities are being implemented the way that we envision them to be, then these metrics will show that they are being implemented. So yeah, I would say that we maybe not made it perfectly explicit within this metrics proposal of one-to-one linking them, but I think that is a very that is a thing that we could do.
All right, thanks, Tim. Jacob.
Yeah, a couple things actually. One, just kind of following up on that conversation, a thought that came to my mind. To the point of where do these metrics align with goals, and how are we actually connecting them, and the value are they providing? I think that's kind of why we were recommending them be passed along to other working groups, recognizing that we aren't the only working group that's responsible for achieving CSNA and the Maryland state's policy goals. We certainly aren't the experts in a lot of these topics. We're the experts in DSP. I
disagree. We've been going at this since August.
We're the experts in DSP, but as you move out, there's other experts in there. And I think those are the voices that are really positioned to say, David, to your point, are these the right metrics that we should be tracking that are really meaningful in terms of how we're progressing towards those goals? So I think that's part of the reason why we are recommending that, we pass these along to other groups to consider. And the second point I wanted to mention, and Eli, I know I had only passed this along to you in email on Tuesday, so certainly not enough time to implement by today, but I think there's certainly a lot of nuance in every party's position. And so I think the document should fully reflect each party's position versus non-utility position, joint Exxon position, really just flush out all the parties within the subgroup. All the utilities were on that. I think Al, Paul, staff were all part of that. And I think it would be just beneficial in that document as we work towards having that as part of the final report, that all of the positions are kind of completely flushed out there.
And I would be fine with doing that. I think the reason that I didn't is I don't want to risk mischaracterizing someone else's stance. And so I tried to characterize based on, you know, the meetings, but, you know, if that's something we want and we want to lay out specific stakeholder opinions, I think that's fine. I would maybe ask others to just jot them down so we have them correctly.
Yeah, don't worry. I mean, if you mischaracterize it, you know, then, you know, when they can correct you. I mean, I'm sure I've mischaracterized stuff. So yeah, so don't worry about that. Jacob, how would you respond to, you know, if we're putting everything kind of like a one-stop shop rather than going, you know, from work group to work group and various dockets to get the metrics? So, I mean, doesn't that make it easier in some respect?
In some respects, but then it presents challenges in the sense of, again, there are stakeholders safe in the EV report that know to only look in the EV report for metrics. And we're now adding additional EV metrics to a DSP report that they're now having to look in multiple places to look at. But again, as I think was laid out in the language that we had provided Eli for the document, was consolidating it in that way creates duplicative reporting, right? And that's administratively burdensome to the commission and staff that's supporting it. It creates that confusion, and, you know, creating that duplicative effort isn't really a good use of ratepayer funds in terms of supporting that. So fully recognize there are some benefits to that, but I think, you know, in terms of duplicating numbers, we would recommend against that.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'll just briefly add, you know, when we're talking about duplicative metrics, just from our perspective, the idea would be to have the exact same metric copied and pasted. So my hope is that would reduce the administrative burden, and we're literally talking about, like, if all of these, you know, EV metrics are reported in the EV report, you just paste it, literally copy and paste it into a section in the DSP report, and there are additional metrics on top of it, but we're not, you know, the idea being that pressing, you know, Control C and Control V in a row will hopefully reduce the administrative burden of duplicative reporting.
Okay.
Hopefully.
All right. Okay. Thank you, sir. All right. David.
Yeah, the other David. So I have a couple comments, and Eli, I apologize because I probably not have been as active in the metrics as I had hoped to be, because I've just a couple of very specific questions and points. The first has to do with, it's getting down into the weeds. This is about the smart inverters. And I do support, you know, what is stated there and providing the information on volt var and volt watt. My only recommendation is that where I think this actually has real value is not just at the aggregate level, it's actually at the circuit or feeder level. So when we're getting down to reports on aggregate deployment metrics, we might want to incorporate some more detail down at a feeder, or at least a more targeted geographic area. That's the first comment. But the second comment has to do with when you get down to the grid management section and about peak load reduction programs. I guess this is a question for Eli, or at least the group. When it says programs, is it only covering electric utility programs or not? I'll pause for an answer, and I have a point I want to make.
I guess the vision was yes, but I'm theoretically amenable to that vision. If these were utility produced reports, obviously easier for utilities to be reporting on their own programs, but curious where you're going with that, David, and perhaps there is a way to consolidate, metrics from other non-utility specific programs or reports. But go ahead.
Well, where I'm going with it is that, there is in PJM, and there is the capability and for programs for customers and for aggregators to participate in demand response programs that are operated by PJM. And secondly, with the implementation of order number 2222, there will be a potential number of DER aggregators who are both of these, currently and then into the future, these aggregators who are not running necessarily in utility programs will be providing resources to support in a grid management, or it needs to have to be characterized or understood as part of grid management. So I was wondering if that's something that's within scope or not.
I would be curious how the utility folks would react to that, and I guess and maybe one follow-up question. So, David, are you familiar? Is PGM is where that data would effectively be housed? Then is that right?
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, if that seems initial reaction, that seems like it could be value adding to the report, and if there is a reasonable method by which the utilities are able to pull that data and incorporate it into the report, I see how that could be beneficial. I think it would just come down to what does that approach look like, how reasonable is it for utilities to be able to kind of grab the data from PJM. But my assumption would be it's relatively easy enough and would therefore be reasonable to do.
And then one last point is related to this, which especially when you move towards a DER aggregation in order number 2222, there will be, I think that a reporting, and I think this is where utilities will have this information, is how many DERs are aggregated as part of an aggregation. In order to receive and participate in the wholesale market, all electric utilities will need to understand what are the DERs participating and actually have to review them for participation. So that information will be, they will have. So I would recommend that be added as going forward.
Thanks, David.
Utilities have any reaction to that suggestion before we move on?
Just wanted to back to the consolidated versus non-consolidated reporting. For one thing, I've done consolidated reporting in the District of Columbia, and it is excruciatingly difficult and time consuming to make all of those different timelines coincide for one report. Currently, Empower, EV reporting, all these are on different timelines, and we would need to go back to all of those groups, and the commission would need to go back to all those groups and completely change all those timelines. Or the other option is, if we go with this cut and paste that Eli is recommending, my finding there is that you lose context. And data taken out of context only results in more data requests, more confusion, more administrative burden, and eventually more cost to ratepayers. I think that just DSP reporting is very important, and we've been, talking to staff about their interest in making sure that we're reporting on specifically grid modernization efforts, those efforts specifically surrounding the CS&A goals. There are certain metrics that Eli has put forward that I think are supportive of those, but right now what we have is basically every report possible thrown into one basket, and there is nothing that lends to readability, to understandability, about having masses of data that all at once, rather than having it sliced and diced according to his particular needs. And so I have to disagree with Eli here. I think that this will actually create more confusion, and the fugue of data will actually hide the main goals of this proceeding and of the CS&A if we go with a massive reporting like this, in addition to just being administratively clunky. And so while I understand many of you are interested in having one-stop shopping, that is the difficulty of the commission dockets. That's not a utility problem. That is, if there's ways we can find to make the commission's website more workable, to post things on our websites to make it more workable, that is a solve I think that would be more useful than a huge lump of data thrown all at once at everyone. So that's my take as after 8 years of regulatory compliance in the district where there is a lot of reporting.
All right, don't go anywhere. The reason I called on you because I thought you were responding to David.
No, I wanted to go back to an old piece.
Well, do you have any response to David?
Unfortunately, no. But
Okay.
I wanted to get my 2 cents in before lunch.
Okay, very good. Jacob, I'm staring at your rectangle. Do you have anything? Waiting for you to turn. There you go.
Nothing immediate. And
Okay.
to be honest, did have to step away for a second, so I may have missed exactly what it is. So that maybe have to be something we follow up on.
Okay. All right. All right. I'll note the time of the discussion, Jacob, and email it to you. All right, DeAndre.
Yes, thank you, Chuck. Thank you, Eli, for this report and the work you've done so far, and congratulations. I don't know if congratulations is in order, but wish you luck in your future endeavors. But I just wanted to reiterate staff's position in regards to the metrics that we've been in discussions with the group. In regards to Mr. David Comas' comments, we feel that the metrics that have been proposed need to be tied back to the CSNA goals. If they're not tied into the CSNA goals, then can they be the metrics that we need for this work group? Because the CSNA goals are the foundation of this distribution system planning, period. The work group and distribution system planning moving forward are tied to those 12 goals that are in the CSNA. So if the metrics are not tied to those CSNA goals, then can they be metrics for this work group? I think we have to think about that. In regards to the reporting, I think we have to be mindful. Again, we have to be mindful of a request or a proposal to collect data for the sake of collecting data, then collecting information that can give us, or that have to be tied to the goals that can give us a measure of progress. Collecting the Sadie, Safety, Katie info for every single feeder across every single inch of this state is a lot of information. I've done records inspections for utilities, and that can be $3,000 to $5,000. I'm sorry, $3,000 to $5,000. Look, I'm thinking about money. 3,000 to 5,000 pieces of data for each utility. Those are a lot of resources, both here at the commission and with each of the utilities to kind of review and gather. So I think we want to make sure that the information that we request is pertinent information for us to gauge the progress of a utility. If that information needs to be condensed some, maybe we need to bring it to a higher level. That's up for debate. But to actually have data for every single feeder across the state is a lot of information that we definitely need to think about. But overall, I think some of the efforts, the information that was provided in the work group is definitely, in the metrics subgroup, is definitely a starting position. Is definitely a lot of things we do agree with as far as the process of having the utilities provide, or the process or the the overall regulatory process in regards to distribution system planning, we're kind of on board with, but a level of data. I mean, we recommended to possibly explore recommending some of the other reports that are tied to distribution plan, such as the interconnection work group report. I mean, the interconnection report and other reports to maybe quote unquote beef those reports up with more data. But to kind of bring all of that data into this one report will be a lot of data and a lot of resources that have to be used in order to do that. So so that's pretty much my overall take.
Thanks, DeAndre. Appreciate the kind words. Also appreciate the feedback a lot. Just to respond to a couple of points from you and a collection of kind of points that I've heard from others. You know, we have gone back and forth a couple times among the subgroup about the feeder level specificity. I think we did hear from some folks that, you know, feeder level may not be reasonably possible, you know, would require significant additional effort, significant additional money. And I think we ended up pulling out the, you know, feeder by feeder basis from the current list, recognizing that. So appreciate and agree with that feedback. Following up on your other point about, you know, reporting for reporting's sake and ensuring this is all tied back to CSNA. Totally agree with what you're saying there. We were trying to be, you know, focused and purposeful in each of the metrics that we are recommending here. We did not yet do a very explicit one-to-one mapping of, you know, this metric ties directly to this CSNA goal. However, that was absolutely the intent of each of the metrics, that they are indeed intended to support, you know, providing data around the achievement of CSNA goals. We're happy to take the next step to more clearly kind of tie those two things together. I've, you know, now heard a couple of folks kind of make a recommendation along those lines. So we could certainly take the next steps of more explicitly tying each metric back to the CSNA. So thanks for that feedback and appreciate folks' opinions thus far.
Great. Thank you. Dr. Bartlett.
Yeah, well, I think this discussion in the room we're going to have after lunch, I think, is going to remind us of how much we're going to miss Eli. He's done an incredible amount of work in both these documents. So a number of things to reflect on. First, this discussion about tying it to the goals has just come up. I think that I'm not technical enough to look at all of those very technical indicators and say whether they do or do not adequately reflect the potential goals. But I think that that's something that we should be keeping as context, and it's very important. And so, and in doing it, I think it's important not to just say, okay, this indicator is associated with that goal, but really think of the achievement of that goal. What do we have to know if we're on path to that goal? So I've assumed in the more technical dimensions of this that's what's being considered here, but I actually can't tell exactly if that's true. But I think that's an important principle. If we're going to be measuring progress toward the goals, that should be done. So I think that extra dimension would be important. I also do support the idea that we should collaborate in some way with the other working groups to make sure that we're not looking at one set of indicators and they're looking at another for the same thing, like EVs. It makes a lot of sense that we would be, that they would at least, they may not be looking at it in terms of CSNA goals, and we are. And so our indicator might be additional, but still might be, the real question is whether it somehow conflicts with sets of indicators or whatever that they're proposing. So I think some level of review by the others would be, just for the relevant ones to their work, would be important. I think the overall question of a consolidated report, I mean, I hear Ethan and saying that, yeah, it's a lot of work and everything. And this is actually, I was the minority person who said that maybe it could be a commission report. But if so, it would have to be identifiable, the metric data would need to be identifiable by utility. So you'd have, for example, graphs or tables with the different utilities on the x-axis and the specific metric on the y-axis with the values for each of them going across, so that you would actually see what the performance of each utility was. Because for the action orientation of the kind of reporting we're talking about, it would need to be not just aggregated across the state, but specifically identifiable by utility, so that we can say, okay, here's where we need to do some more work, or these people are really moving ahead fast and we need to learn from that, whatever. But it is possible in that sense. This was a suggestion that maybe the commission would prepare the report. And this is not a hill to die on, but it was just an idea to put on the table that because so many of these different reports come into the commission, and if we take that, it's more than cut and paste. It'd just be incorporation of that data as it was reported into this consolidated report. But from a stakeholder perspective, I think having this information scattered all over the place is going to make it very difficult for people to actually assess how things are going and what needs to be done. So having it in one place somehow. So I guess the example, because I've worked on community solar, would be the RPS report in a sense, where the commission produces a specific report that brings a lot of different pieces together. And again, because they're receiving all of these different, whether it's the EV report or the interconnection report or whatever, that could potentially position the commission. And we might have to ask for staff to support this, just as staff is being asked for to support other areas of energy sector policy. But I just think we need to think of a way that we can bring the data together so that the stakeholders have the opportunity to see what is happening. That seems to be the basic purpose of that. The utilities know what's happening. And also the commission, honestly, that it can be in a place where the commission can actually wrap its hands around it, because this is so fundamental. In terms of feeder specific, because David actually suggested going down to feeder level for some other data, but also the original metrics report did have some feeder specific metrics, and then I think DeAndre made the same point before, that it's 3,000 to 5,000 feeders each, which isn't practical. But there may be a way, for example, to consolidate information across those, for example, reliability indicators. So you could, for example, take the average of SAIDI across all circuits and the average of SAIDI across the circuits serving vulnerable communities. So you could have those two dimensions there. Or if there's such a thing as a SAIDI violation, if there are levels above which utilities don't like to go, then you could report the number of violations for all circuits, and then the number of violations for circuits serving vulnerable communities. So you could have some sense of how that's working. Anyway, there may be a way to consolidate the data from feeders in many cases, perhaps not all, to look at it that way. And finally, I would just say that this, since we're talking about incorporate, this it's very appropriate that this somehow merges with the discussions we've had about the report, and that also merges with the proposal we're going to see this afternoon for the overall recommendations. One concept I might introduce is that the best programs in other fields not only report on indicators or on target or on their metrics, what they've achieved, but also set targets for the next reporting period. That actually gives you something to strive for. And again, it's a best practice in programs in general, and it might be something we could consider going forward. But that's as they say in New Orleans, lagniappe.
All right, thank you very much, sir. All right, Tim.
Yeah, I'm gonna probably, I think, maybe voice some of the same things that Al just voiced, but I think kind of, yeah, to address some of what we just talked about. I think to like Ethan's point, I think our original proposal here was kind of his like secondary option of like essentially not trying to like coordinate and sync all of these things together, all these disparate reportings together, and rather to just kind of re-report. But recognizing kind of like what he's saying here of like, or like the suggestion of, you know, these reports being more readily available. I mean, I guess I think my point, I think you know, the OPC's point kind of generally was that the metrics need to be readily accessible. So like the readers of this DSP report should have access to these metrics directly. And like clearly that's like currently not the case. It is very difficult to come across all of these and put together all of these metrics that you need. And potentially if all of these recommendations for metrics end up like having a home within these disparate reports, I think it may be reasonably appropriate if the DSP report was to have a consolidated like set of links to these other reports, or potentially a like consolidated web page with all of these reports. And you know, that's not necessarily a terrible outcome from this. But our recommendation here is that like these are like some of the things that we actually think we need to understand in the DSP process. Like these are the metrics that the DSP process needs. And I think this touches more to like Jacob's point of like, you know, the owners of the other reports probably should have some input on what is in those reports, and they do have expertise that we don't necessarily have here. But that is one of the reasons why we are making these recommendations to them, to be like, hey, these are the things that like maybe is outside of like your specific you know, context of like what you're thinking about in these reports. However, your report would be useful to us if it would be more useful to us if it included some of these things. So our recommendations providing these like our recommendations that like, hey, we'd really love to see these metrics in the report. And I think that's kind of our goal there. Just because I think there's a bit of there's like some concern, I think, of how that actually gets done. Like if we're not recommending these if we're not explicitly recommending these metrics, how do those metrics end up in these other reports? And so I think I don't know where else to put these recommendations other than in our, you know, where to put these metrics other than in our recommendations of, hey, this is the stuff that we need for DSP metrics. So
yeah, no, the recommendations are in the right place. Now, what happens to them if and when they get adopted, if they stay here or get spread out? Yeah, that's an argument for another day. So, but no, but it's certainly good things to think about and some good options. All right, Ethan, I know I'm saying between people in lunch, or actually maybe it's not, or Ethan or Jacob. On page 4. In regards to the DER integration, what's the utilities concern with those 2 items that are highlighted?
I'm trying to pull up the document.
Sure. It's the volt var and the volt watt.
Yeah, I think our point there is the state just recently passed specific settings for smart inverters, and you know, any reporting on those smart inverters should be aligned and reflective of what the regulation is regarding smart inverters. Is at least my understanding from a technical perspective, or I don't have a technical perspective on this, but at least my understanding of it is that these aren't necessarily a part of that regulation, and so the recommendation is that, you know, it's just tracked at the number of smarter inverter level.
Okay. All right, so it goes beyond. But Eli, you guys would like to go beyond what's essentially in the regs?
Yeah, we think
Okay.
tracking these things would be value adding. Basically, these are kind of the key things that will be able to demonstrate how and to what extent utilities are deploying flexibly interconnected DERs, so DERs that do not necessarily have firm capacity. So yeah, I think these are pretty, and I saw a thumbs up from David, who's my smart inverter go-to and anything related to smart inverters. So yeah, we think these would be value adding just to be able to demonstrate how utilities are kind of getting better at interconnecting flexible DERs.
Okay. And Jacob, are you necessarily opposed to the concept, or are you just kind of saying it's beyond the regs? They're new. Why don't we just concentrate on what the regs are now?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's for us kind of unclear what the benefit is if there's already existing regulation around what smart inverter settings there are, and we have those smart inverter settings. And so I don't think we necessarily see that kind of clear benefit.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. And don't go away. I got one more, and I think I already know the answer, but all right. On the electric vehicles after the Connecticut map, number of EVs registered in the state, charging ports deployed versus charging needs.
Yeah,
it's on page 7.
Yeah, I see. I think here it was, I think we don't necessarily see these as utility metrics. Obviously, EVs registered in the state, that's not a utility specific metric. And so certainly redundant in terms of us reporting that. But also identifying in terms of like estimated charging needs. I think that's, again, more positioned for a statewide kind of group to be evaluating what's the state's needs.
And is this information, do you even have some of the information they're asking for?
I don't think so. And I think even the footnote on 18 is referencing a DOE data site.
Okay.
So I don't think it's specific utility data that's tracked.
All right. That's what I thought your objection was going to be. So, okay. All right. Yeah, Ethan, you want to jump in, sir?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that was a general, and I wasn't as close to this as Jacob, but I understand a lot of the interest in this data, but a lot of it seemed to be something that should be reported by a state agency, not the utilities. So that's when my general takeaway was that perhaps MEA or OPC themselves should maybe step up to the plate right here and say which parts of these they think they should be a part of, because I mean we're just utilities with a jurisdictional role. We aren't state agencies, so that's something I think we could explore here.
Okay. All right. All right. Go ahead, Al.
Yeah, I was just going to say that was one other dimension of why I thought maybe a PSC report would be something consolidated all that way, because they have those other reports and they also have access to these statewide data. And then there will be additional DSP specific data that the utilities would provide that would also be part of that report. And again, it would need to be by utility, but nonetheless, that would be a way to consolidate it all.
All right.
And make it easier for the utilities.
Okay. So we got to vote for OPC, MEA, and staff.
I want to I want to pass the buck around since everybody's passing it around. How about no, I'm just kidding.
I know. All right. Okay. That's fine. I appreciate the feedback. All right. So anybody else on OPC's metrics? Again, Eli, I think that's good work by you in the work group. I think that's a lot more consensus than I anticipated. So I think it's a good document. DeAndre.
Yeah, I just wanted to chime in. I think we also have to keep in mind in regards to the time frame. So I'm assuming that we will be recommending a regulatory process in which these reports will be evaluated and or information. And so the depth of which data is contained within these reports will have an effect on the time frame in regards to the regulatory process, which will have an effect on as to when these plans will be approved, effective, and implemented.
Just so you know, DeAndre, and we'll present this in the afternoon. We get into we got a couple of slides on timeline and what the whole cadence of this reporting structure looks like. So that might be prudent to discuss when we get into those details this afternoon. It's a good question.
All right. Anybody else? Questions? Yes, Paul.
Yeah, I wanted to comment a little bit on the EVs and EVSEs as to who does it. 35% of greenhouse gases come from ICE cars. So it's kind of key to get that information, over the transom. And the key for, I think, for the utilities is, where are the EVs going to be, and will people be maintaining their own power sources from their homes or from wherever? And do they have the capability on their feeders and transformers to take that additional load, which I think will be bidirectional over time, but not initially? Can they deal with it? And I think that's the big question. So, from my standpoint, it needs to be done by someone, whether it be OPC or someone else, but it's got to be in this overview in order to get to greenhouse gas reduction. Otherwise, we're going to fail. I mean, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, sir. All right. All right. Anyone else? All right, Ethan, you were a proponent of lunch. How long do you want, sir?
We have 45 minutes.
That's fine. So what that puts us at what, 1:25? Why don't we just go, well, let's say 1:30 to make it easier on everybody.
I like round numbers.
All right, we'll see you then.
Thanks all.